now. So again, welcome to the reopening member meetup. We're excited that you're here today. One note, because this is a new kind of conversation and discussion that we're having for this member meetup, we'll be using a new technology. We are going to request feedback. We're going to share an evaluation in the chat at the end, and we'll also send via email directly after the session. We have lots to learn. We want to make sure the technology is accessible. So we really value your input and would really love to hear from you to take time to share with us. So speaking of that new technology, we're going to be using Slido today. My colleague Elizabeth has added the link to the chat along with the passcode. Slido is a tool that allows us to upvote questions. It's really easy to use. On the right of our screen, you'll see the joining as a participant, no account needed. You just enter the code, and our code is MC2020. While we'll be starting with a panel conversation, our goal is to have a really extended Q&A session. So you have the opportunities to submit specific questions which were preloaded into Slido. You're welcome to upvote these and also add additional questions throughout the session. If you're having trouble with Slido, you're also welcome to add to the chat. We will make sure that those are getting translated into Slido. But our goal is really to make our Q&A responsive to what the most pressing concerns are that haven't been covered in the presentations. If you have any questions, feel free to message myself or Elizabeth in the chat. We're here to help with any access issues. But yes, we will be excited to see these technologies used today. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Irina Meza, our Chief of Staff and our moderator for the conversation today.
Good morning. As mentioned, my name is Irina Meza, and I'm the Chief of Staff here at Mission Capital, and I'm excited to be here with you today to guide our conversation. We're going to start with a brief introduction from each panelist. I'll introduce each panelist, and they'll share with you about their role, what their experience has been like in the pandemic, and key takeaways for nonprofits. Don't forget to add your questions on Slido or in the chat. We're going to start with Catrina Salinas, Chief People Officer at Central Texas Food Bank, who helped oversee operations that never closed down. She'll share with us insight into their experience navigating COVID-19 accommodations and changes. Katrina?
All right, thank you, Irina, and thank you to Mission Capital for hosting this webinar. It's definitely something that is needed and ongoing, because we don't know what's going to happen with COVID and the pandemic, and when will it end? I think that's a question that we're all asking ourselves. But I'll take you through a small journey, or of what we ended up doing. As you know, Central Texas Food Bank serves 21 counties of Central Texas, and you probably have seen us everywhere. We're doing mass distributions. We are, I've said we've never closed, and that's true. But in looking at the Slido questions, we are actually partially remote. So our administrative staff is working from home, at least those that have a role where they can. But we have our drivers and our warehouse employees and mobile pantry individuals who are going out and serving the community and are client facing. So when COVID hit, we immediately went into just reaction mode. And what did we end up doing? So we ultimately created a COVID task force, if you will, that was focused on every area of the food bank. And one of the things that we did not do early on, but we ultimately did in lesson learned, was creating worst case scenarios. And I'll kind of talk to that in a moment. But initially, we just went through, what do we need to do? How are we going to react? What do we do for staff? And one of the first things that we did was gather masks, really bandanas. That's kind of where we started, because at that time, the panic and the rush had already started happening. So we ran out, we got as many masks and bandanas as we could. We got goggles, gloves, antibacterial, all the things that I'm sure all of you did for your workplaces and your homes as well. So we did that. We made sure that we had our high touch areas disinfected on a daily basis. So we also saw that we needed staff to do that. So we provided every employee with 2 face coverings, and in an effort to, so they could wash one every night and train that out as they needed to. But since March, we have been work from home, essentially. And, we're still work from home through the end of the year. We kept pushing it back and pushing it back. And finally, as an executive team, we made the decision of, we got to put a stake in the ground with this one. And we just said end of the year. And that's what we ultimately did. But at the same time, as you know, those of you that are parents or have employees that are parents, we had to deal with the school closures. And, I myself as a parent had to navigate and balance that. So I was very hyper focused on what to do for employees. So one of the first things that I created was a pandemic policy that talked about school closures. We created pandemic PTO, and we utilized the CDC guidelines of 14 days in the event of. And it was for anybody that needed it for a school closure, for anybody that was required to be quarantined, for anyone where we thought they may have had Corona or COVID-19. So that was one of the first things that we had created and rolled out to staff. And I think doing that gave staff some peace of mind in terms of, if this happens, the food bank will take care of us, so to speak. And this was before the FFCRA, which I know Vanessa will probably talk a little bit more about later today, but that was something that we did immediately. And then, as I mentioned, we just honestly just tried to stay afloat. We knew that the community needed us. We knew that we needed to be, delivering the food. So what we ended up doing a couple of months in is start talking about worst case scenarios. What does a worst case scenario look like for the food bank? And for us, that was, we can't deliver food to the community. We could not meet the needs of the community. So what do we do? So we ultimately went to shift work. So, for example, we were just, an 8 to 5 kind of shop. Not really, but just your typical day hours. But we went to 3 shifts. So we had evening, we had overnight. And one of the things that allowed us to do is to keep our staff of, 60 in operations and 20 in the warehouse separated. That way, if one person, we kind of said went down because of COVID, we were able to track and do some contact tracing. Who have you been in contact with? What have you been doing? That sort of thing. And it would not impact our operations as a whole. And I think that was one of the smartest things that we did early on, is really looking at that worst case scenario for us. The other thing that we did is we created small, we called them pods. So when we go out to those mass distributions that you see, we have employees that work those distributions. We did the same thing. We kept it down to 2 or 3 employees as opposed to, double that number on a regular basis. We mandated that they could not ride in a car together. So whether that was their own personal vehicle or whether that was a fleet vehicle that was the food bank's, you could not ride in the same car with somebody. And again, this was all in an effort to keep people as separate as possible. One of the other things that we did is we enforced social distancing within the food bank, and that was for employees and for our volunteers, and requiring the masks as well. So, we were very diligent and deliberate in what we were doing, but we also had to react as quickly as we possibly could to maintain our operations in the community, but also for our staff as well. And it's still an ongoing, response. Today, we still have our COVID task force. We still have our updates. We actually just moved from weekly meetings to a monthly meeting, but we do have an email set up so we can communicate to each other that's on this task force, and we're just trucking along. And I think now it's safe to say we've somewhat normalized where we're at today. It does not feel like we're chasing anything anymore. We're normal, so to speak, and starting to work on those projects that we frankly had to drop 6 months ago. And, we're kind of picking up those pieces and slowly moving the needle a little bit to where this has become our norm. And I don't know what 2021 is going to look like. And we still have schools and the closures and, how does that work with our parents? And there's fear. I've had employees come to me and say, I'm afraid to come into work. And, we have to contest with that. have to go through that conversation. One of the other things that I think is very important that we did is continue to talk about mental health in this process, because there's a lot of anxiety that goes along with what's going on, and nobody has ever lived through something like this before, and we know that. So, you know, sharing out our employee assistance program, we actually just adopted a new virtual mental health counseling for employees. So that's a big component too, because employees are juggling a lot with not only working from home, but the anxiety of COVID-19, schools being closed, teaching your kids remotely. It's a lot to contest with. So, you know, we've definitely made the most of it at this point in time. So I don't know where I'm at with my 10 minutes, but I could go on, but Irina, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Katrina, and for sharing all of those experiences that provided us with such a good insight into all of the things that you're doing and how some of those things we can apply to our own nonprofits as well. Thank you. Next up is Vanessa A. Gonzalez, an attorney at Bickerstaff, Heath, Delgado, and Acosta. She'll share with us legal considerations for your organizations. Vanessa? Oh, you're still on mute.
Okay, I'm off mute now. Thank you for having me. Appreciate being here. So I do employment law, 100% employment law, and I actually represent a lot of nonprofits and small businesses and big companies. I run the gambit. Employment law applies the same to everybody. So when March hit and the pandemic hit, I think all employment lawyers were slammed. And the first thing we did was start writing those policies that Katrina was talking about and helping HR people and small nonprofits and big companies write their policies of what they were going to do to comply with the new federal law that came out as part of the CARES Act, was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It's now commonly known as the FFCRA. And for the first time in American history, required employers to give paid sick leave and to give paid FMLA. You all probably are familiar with FMLA. There's no requirement that it was paid for the 12 weeks of leave if you have a serious health condition or a family member, et cetera. There was no requirement to be paid. This is the first time in history that we had to have paid sick leave and paid FMLA. And so in March, I was just writing policies for everybody, for all of my clients, to make sure that they were ready to go by April 1st, because that went into effect on April 1st, and it stays in effect till December 31st. And so one of the big questions I was faced with in the beginning was, do we fall under one of the exceptions to this new legislation that requires paid sick leave? And there was 3 broad exceptions, and only one would possibly apply to today's audience, the nonprofit one, which is for employers with less than 25 employees. Some of the other folks want to know about the healthcare workers and about emergency responders exceptions. But the one that really a lot of the nonprofit folks want to know about was for the small employers. And you know, if you can't run your business giving this paid sick leave because you're too small, I would say if you have like less than 15 employees, then this is a possibility. But you really wanted to examine whether or not it was worth it to have the exception because of the mental state of your workforce. If you can manage to give this sick time, you really want to try and do it just for the well-being of your employees and for your organization to try to continue past and through this pandemic. But there's some that they just can't do it and maintain their business. They're nonprofits. So we went through the steps of how to comply with that exception and what you need to do to document why you believe that you would that exception would apply. But for the most part, it was more about writing the policies that would apply when you implement these new regulations that allowed for 10 weeks of paid FMLA, expanded FMLA leave if your child's school was closed, and that's at 2/3 of the rate of pay, and 80 hours of paid sick leave, and then an additional 2 weeks of unpaid FMLA. So that's a total of potential of 14 weeks for employers. But I'm not going to go through the details of that because we only have 10 minutes. I have a PowerPoint that I've been using, and it probably takes about an hour long to go through the whole thing. So I'm not going to go through it all. We're going to wait for the question and answer session, and I think a lot of people are familiar with the FFCRA at this point. Like Katrina said, she's already been implementing that paid leave, and she's already got her policies, and everybody probably made some decisions early on. But a lot of people didn't because they just went remote, and they did completely virtual and teleworking. And so they didn't have to worry about this, which is great. And I'm saying, keep it going. Two things were kind of interesting to me was that, the city of Austin was trying to have paid sick leave, and the governor sued Austin the state governor sued Austin about paid sick leave. And then the most conservative federal administration puts in paid sick leave. I was like, this is great. And so another thing that was interesting to me is that, dealing with employment law all my life, every day, it seemed like having people work from home was just something that a lot of employers said they couldn't do. And suddenly when this hits, we can all do this. We can do this. And everybody suddenly can work efficiently from home. So it's just interesting things that turn the tables, I guess, as we go through these cycles of life. And so a lot of people, which is really the best thing, is just having everybody work from home, and they didn't even have to worry about the FFCRA, except for those employees who had to be there. The IT department's got to be there, right? So that everybody can work from home. And so there's certain positions that just have to be at work. And so that's when some of these things will come into play. So the next big thing, I think, that really affected a lot of people, especially, the organizations where the employees have to be there, or the positions where employees have to be there, is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and what you can and cannot ask employees when they're in there. Can you take their temperature? It was pretty amazing to me that with the pandemic, the EEOC put out guidance. They actually put it out for the H1N1 pandemic, and it says you can take their temperatures. You can do all kinds of things during a pandemic because the CDC guidelines. The EEOC says the ADA will not interfere with the CDC guidelines. It will not interfere with the health authorities' local recommendations. And so that gives employers the power to take people's temperatures and ask them about their symptoms and things that you would never dream of doing, because it might be asking them about their disability. You're not allowed to make, a disability and medical condition inquiries of your employees under the ADA, unless it's a business necessity and related to their job. And so there's got to be very special circumstances in the regular work world. But under a pandemic, those go away, because the ADA says, the pandemic puts into place a known exception to the ADA, which is called the direct threat exception. And the direct threat exception has always been there. So like the direct threat exception has to do with if their disability is going to create a direct threat to themselves or other people in the workplace, then the ADA doesn't apply. And I represent some colleges, and they have a police department, and that sort of thing can happen or a driver, like Katrina has drivers, if they're going to have potentially, they could have a seizure while they're driving. Well, that could be a direct threat to somebody else. And so that would be an exception to the ADA. So that exception's always been there. And the EEOC guidelines that came out said, there's a pandemic. So direct threat is an automatically defense where you have the evidence to assert it. And we hereby say direct threat applies. And so you don't even have to try to prove it. The EEOC guidelines say it applies. And so because of that, you can do all sorts of things that you can ask your employees and have them do that you normally would not be able to do. And the guidance on the EEOC website is very clear, and you can turn to it any time. And I have a PowerPoint with all the links. If anybody wants to email me, I can forward this to you so you can have it all in one place. But the DOL has 103 questions and answers on guidelines about going back to school. And, if you have under the FFCRA, and if the schools are closed, and I can talk about that more later if you want to, about remote learning and optional school and how that applies. And then the EEOC guidelines, I have the link to that, and that says, that the CDC guidelines trump, and it talks about all the things that you can do to your employees that will not violate the ADA because there's a pandemic. You can make them wear masks, you can take their temperatures, you can ask them about their medical information. It's just pretty amazing the things that can be done that normally we'd be like, oh, don't do that. Now you can do so much. And so that's kind of the area where we're working now, and where I'm working a lot now is that expanded FMLA, because the school's closed. But if it's remote learning, then yes, the school's closed and they can get FMLA. If it's optional and they choose to stay home, then no, they cannot get the expanded FMLA because the school's actually open. There was a New York case about intermittent leave, because what if the schools is open some days and is closed other days because they're alternating the student days, then you can have intermittent leave. The FFCRA, the regulations, the DOL regulations said that the employer has to agree to the intermittent leave. New York, no, the employer doesn't have to agree. They get intermittent leave if they need intermittent leave. And then the DOL regulations were just updated August 27th to say, yes, the New York court is right. We're going to implement that now across the nation. And it's automatic. If there's school on one day and off the next day, they can have intermittent expanded FMLA because the school is closed on certain days. So that's kind of what I'm dealing with now is the back to school issues, and people are starting to travel again from work. And so, employers will know if they can ask them questions when they get back from traveling about whether or not they were in a hot zone. Yes, you can. Again, the CDC guidelines trump. And so you can ask them these things if they've been exposed. And so that's kind of more the line of work now. Like Katrina says, it's the new norm, and we're settling in to where we are and how we're going to come as the kids go back to school, and a lot of people are still working from home, which is still the best thing. And we're just kind of waiting to see when employees start coming back to work, all those guidelines and how they're going to go into place. Everybody has to walk the same direction in the hallway. We have one-way hallways. We have people wearing masks. We have hand sanitizers. We can question them. We can take their temperatures when they come in the door. So those sorts of things are the new questions as some employees are coming back to work. So I could go on and on, but I'm going to pass it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you for highlighting FFCRA, ADA, EEOC guidance. And I know we'd love to take you up on your offer as far as the PowerPoint so that we can share it out with the participants on the call as well. A reminder to our participants, don't forget that you can add questions for any of the panelists in the chat or using Slido. On Slido, please make sure you upvote for questions you'd like the panel to answer in the Q&A. Now we're going to hear from Hunter and Jennifer from Cotton Global Disaster Solutions about their cleaning recommendations and experiences. Hunter and Jennifer?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Fox. I have Hunter Hicks on with me as well. We're both with Cotton Global Disaster Solutions. For those of you who aren't aware of who we are a full water, fire restoration, reconstruction company. But on top of that, we've been doing a lot of COVID-19 disinfection and decontamination. I'll let you introduce yourself too, Hunter, sorry.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi guys, my name's Hunter Hicks. I'm an account manager here local to Austin with Cotton. I've been with Cotton going on 2 years now. But yeah, our experience has been very hands-on naturally with cleaning and just the development, the changes that have happened over the last 6 months. And it still is continually changing and developing, and we learn more every day. But Jennifer, I'll let you kind of dig in, and I'll be here to support whatever you need.
Thank you. I did provide a slide, if we have it on there. There it is. So I have two different areas, the cautionary action, a required action, and a re-entry process. So first of all, we just want to understand the differences between a deep cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfection, the key terms. So cleaning is removing dirt and impurities only. So like at your home, you just do a quick cleanup. Sanitizing is reducing germs to safe levels, and then disinfection, which kills most germs on surfaces. And that's when we are called in to come in to kill any virus, not just coronavirus. We've been doing this for years for schools for flu, and it's no different. The EPA has confirmed the same chemicals that we've been using for flu all these years is the same kills for coronavirus as well. What we recommend is to put together a contingency plan for your company. Which, we would wipe down any surfaces, use electrostatic disinfectant spray. Electrostatic fogger is a type of fogger that the EPA, CDC, and even ourselves recommend using, and to use a CDC-approved cleaning agents, which you can find all of that on their website and the EPA's website as well, the kind of different cleaning agents that you can use. We also recommend having a one-on-one consultation with the vendor that does the cleaning. So you know who to call. So when you do get a call that an employee or several are affected, you know who to call to come in right away and begin the process. And to have maybe temporary portable assets set up. So if you are a company that you have to keep working and you all have to still be together for whatever reason, we can have set up, office spaces, portable restrooms, even to keep you working as we are cleaning your office space. For businesses with multiple office or locations, it is recommended to limit movement between locations to reduce risk of possible infection. So if you have 2 offices, Office A and Office B, and someone from Office A needs to go to a meeting to Office B, don't physically go to that meeting. That's when you start doing it virtually. You keep everybody in your offices together. Not all cleaning companies are equal, so ensure your vendor has a current certificate of insurance along with a chemical list with the EPA numbers and CDC recommendations. Identify areas where infection may have spread and prioritize zones of greater need. Areas to be disinfected should include your office, mail and copy room, your rec areas, including other hand-operated and touch equipment. In the event, personnel must be present during disinfection procedures to determine whether they will need temporary facilities to continue working, as I mentioned before. Some required action, have an expert disinfection service providers. They will wear appropriate PPE gear. They have to keep their licenses and to protect themselves and you as well. So that we're talking masks, gloves, sometimes eyewear, goggles. In certain shared areas such as bathrooms may require multiple disinfections daily. Essential personnel, it is important to provide separate work areas for those without symptoms, but it's equally important to protect those with confirmed diagnoses by providing work and rest areas of their own, which may simply just be their home. You need to go home and be quarantined for 2 weeks or however long the company feels comfortable and themselves feel comfortable. Develop a custom plan to protect people and property preparing for potential COVID-19 seasonally. We have flu season. This is our first time having coronavirus. We don't know. Is this a seasonal epidemic? We don't know. So just kind of prepare yourselves so if that does happen, you aren't blindsided and you have again, contingency plan in place. And we also have some recommendations for re-entry process for those who have been having their employees and staff working from home, and maybe you are ready to get back into the office as a group together. You do need to have some type of plan in place for re-entering. Before settling a return date, assign a cross-functional team to develop a re-entry plan that keeps your employees and building safe. Certain team members that could be on this task force could be HR, legal, the risk management team, operations, and safety personnel, because everybody's going to have a different opinion on with how their jobs are performed. So it's good to have different points of view so you can cover every basis. Prepare your physical workplace, clean and disinfect, reconfigure the space. Maybe the desks need to be 6 feet apart. Maybe you need to have the barriers now in between each other if you have close proximity. Define the reentry process. Are you going to do a phased return approach? So maybe one department comes in this month and then maybe you add another department the next month. Or is it a staggered shift approach? A Monday, Wednesday, Friday team, a Tuesday, Thursday team, a morning team, an afternoon team. And then there's employee testing and monitoring. Have everybody come in and be tested their temperature. Monitor everybody who, they aren't feeling well for, even if the sniffles now, you never know. You may want to have an approach to maybe go ahead and send them home. Enforce proper safety protocols. Place signs around the office. Provide employees with PPE if needed. So provide masks, gloves, sanitizing, hand sanitizers everywhere, even wipe down. And then make hand sanitizer and the cleaning wipes easily accessible for them. Maybe have them throughout the office. Maybe have the freestanding ones on, every corner of the office, whatever makes everyone feel more comfortable and accessible. And encourage employees to frequently sanitize their workstations. Maybe at the end of the day, as you provide cleaning wipes for them, recommend they wipe everything down. Just to lower the chances of disinfecting anyone else. Hunter, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I have just a couple things that I'd like to discuss. One is essentially recommissioning your property because everyone has been away for so long. Outside of simple things as the safety that goes along with COVID-19 is the other trade skills within your property. Making sure your fire and intruder alarm systems are still work properly, make sure that they're attached, hooked up if no one's been at the property. It's just something that you need to make sure still works. If you have commercial kitchens, those probably need to be cleaned. Congealed grease can build up and be a huge fire hazard. Security, has anyone gone by to look at your property to make sure that it hasn't been broken into? things of that nature, just to be aware of with everyone gone for so long and not having the normal personnel that you typically do on a day-to-day basis. And then lastly is just more so the uncertainty behind everything. I mean, you can clean as much as you want and do whatever you can as a psychological relief for employees who are working in the office, but you have to communicate that there's still a lot of uncertainty as far as, even if you do clean, that doesn't stop someone from coming in the next day, possibly being sick, and you're back at square one, and your office space is as contaminated as it could be. So it's just being aware, communication, and following certain safety protocols to make everyone feel and be as safe as they can be.
We don't want to take any more of your time. So if you have any questions, please put it in the chat and Hunter and I will both answer them.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Hunter, and for really highlighting some of the plans we need to be thinking about for cleaning and disinfecting, reentry, and recommissioning of our property. We really appreciate it. And finally, today we have Scott Carr of Carr Development, who will speak to his experience in the real estate area with leases. Scott?
Sorry, I needed to unmute. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for what you do to the community, for the community. Again, my name is Scott Carr. I'll give you a little background, which I think will help explain some of my topics here. So I'm in the commercial real estate business, and I spend about half my time representing companies, helping them find office space to lease or buy. And then the other half of my time is representing landowners and owners of buildings, landlords, et cetera, negotiate leases and purchase and sale agreements with tenants or buyers. So I have a fairly unique perspective where I wear both hats, where I'm sometimes representing a tenant, i.e. a nonprofit that's looking to lease office space or retail space. And then sometimes I'm on the other side of the table negotiating essentially against the other side. I'll come back to some of that in a second when I start talking a little bit more detail about some of the things that you all could be looking out for in your lease and renegotiations of any leases that you have. I would say that the highlight of my whole topic here would be communication. Communication is key with your landlords. And I'm going to kind of mainly focus on that, on just speaking to your landlords and negotiating with your landlords. I think that's probably the simplest method here to explain what I'm trying to get to. So I'm assuming that a lot of you all have had some trouble potentially with your landlord and where they're asking you to pay your full rent during this whole time. And again, I think communication is key. I think when they reach out to you or you reach out to them, you need to be prepared to explain to them how your business is doing, potentially even give them full financial information on how you're doing. We're seeing that a lot, where landlords are asking, before they'll even discuss with the tenant any rent relief or deferment, that they're asking for full financial picture on how you're doing, how you were doing, comparing maybe 19 to 20 month by month. That a lot of that's more in the retail spectrum than it is in the office spectrum, but I think it's also applicable here. And I think that again, that communication is really key, because they're going to want to see that you are in fact hurt. Some people are more so than others. Some people are fully remote and don't see that going back to the office is going to happen, maybe ever. And so I think I've spoken with many folks, even recently, where they're trying to go back to their landlord and downsize their space dramatically, maybe go down to just a couple conference rooms or half their space, talking about sublease opportunities. But you also need to keep in mind, back to the communication piece, that landlords are essentially in the same shoes that you are. They have their bills to pay. Now they have a mortgage, they have taxes, they have insurance, they have maintenance. They still have to run the elevators, mow the grass, change the parking lot lights. Clean the facility. That's obviously a big one. So there's still a lot of obligation that they have. And so to give you full rent relief or deferment may not be in the cards, because they may have a lender that won't allow them to do that. So make sure when you're discussing all this with them that you understand their perspective as well, because we're all in this together. No one did anything wrong. The landlord didn't do anything wrong. The lender didn't. You clearly didn't. So again, we're all sort of in this boat together, trying to figure out how to get through it and when we're going to get through it and the timeline of that. So I think, again, I jokingly in preparation for this kept saying all I was going to do is put communication up on the screen. I can't stress that enough when you're visiting with your landlords and their counsel or their asset managers. It really just depends on how the local landlords may see things differently than a national landlord or a big REIT or something like that. So I think being prepared with your financials, understanding that they're in this together, that you're in this together with them, and then really trying to figure out what's best for you long term. I know is very difficult to navigate because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or next year. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. I do think that this remote work is here to stay, and I think obviously for certain businesses more and less so. And even some of the things on this call have been great for me to hear just people's different perspectives, because my world is fairly finite. I mean, I'm dealing with primarily office tenants, and some of them in my office right here where I'm sitting, everybody but one employee is here. And they basically have been, but everybody's perspective is a little different and everybody's fears are different. But I think that trying to understand what you want, what your asks are in advance. And again, before you even do the ask, make sure you understand the landlord's perspective as best you can. So I think that's the gist of what I have. I'm sure there's probably more questions than anything, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Scott, and for really highlighting that importance of communication and talking to our landlords. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for sharing. We're going to get ready to move into the Q&A portion now. Don't forget, you can add questions and upvote questions in Slido. First up, we'd really love to hear from Katrina and Vanessa. So what are the best ways to write policies with the understanding that there's not a one-size-fits-all protocol? Different employees have different needs, different consideration, risk tolerances, family or self-health concerns. What kind of guidance can you share with us? And we can start with you, Katrina.
Okay, so that's a great question. And, what we ultimately did is we had to write something that was flexible enough to where it could, we had the freedom as an organization to view things on a case-by-case basis. At the same time, though, you also still have to be consistent with that. And that is truly the key. So you can look at each scenario because each scenario is going to be different. But as an example, if I have an employee, and I have several of them that had to work remotely because of school for their kids, allowing one to do so, but not allowing the other to do so in a similar circumstance is definitely that consistency example that I'm talking about. So allow yourself the freedom to be flexible. Truly decide as an organization what you can do from a business perspective. What can you handle? And can this policy be applied to all positions? And should it be? So for us, it was very, we had to really think through administratively. It's easy for somebody with a desk job to work from home, but our drivers can't. But that's just the nature of the job. However, they were still allotted the same type of pandemic PTO or, obviously when the FFCRA came along, they were, provided with that as well. So case by case, flexibility, but also consistency at the same time.
Thank you, Katrina. Vanessa, do you have any guidance for us? When you're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. Here we go. I was just going to say, I absolutely agree with Katrina. You don't want to write your policy so strict that you violate your own policies. That's a big no-no. So you want to write them broad enough where you can have flexibility within those policies to do what the business needs to do, the nonprofit needs to do. And you can even say that in the policies. You can even say positions will be determined on a case-by-case basis, depending on the position. I mean, like for a law firm, in my business, we have to have the IT guy there or else all the lawyers can't work. And that's just, that's a position that's just required to be present. No ifs, ands, or buts. And so you have to be able to write your policies so that there's flexibility for the different positions. And of course, there's some things that have to be in the policies according to the new federal legislation. And so you want to make sure that you comply. It's a good idea to have your employment lawyer review them, the policies to make sure that you are complying with those mandatory requirements in the FFCRA. And so there's just a lot of considerations when you write the policies. And I definitely recommend that you have legal counsel review your policies.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And we have another question from the audience that probably is for you also. Can we require some positions to return to the office and not others based on position or based on COVID risk factors?
Yes, I think that's, I just mentioned that with an IT person, there's certain positions that have to be in the office, and you can certainly, if I understood the question correctly, you can certainly require some positions to be in the office and others are not required to be there. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then I do have a question for all of the panelists. What would you advise for your worst case scenario planning? And this is open to anyone. Any worst case scenario planning advice?
Yeah, so for us, it was, essentially what does it look like? So identify what does worst case scenario look like for your organization? And, I mentioned this, and it's going to be different for everyone on this call. For us, worst case was not being able to distribute food to the community, not be able to fulfill our mission. In general, but especially in a time like this where so many people are unemployed and lost their job, and we continue to see that number rise. So that was our worst case. So that's where we had to plan around that, is how do we not get to that? What does that look like? And that's where we came up with shift work and the various pods. Instead of having a large number of people work together, make that number smaller. So if somebody was exposed to COVID-19, it wasn't exposing 6 people, it was just 2 people. And we've had a number of situations like that happen, and we have seen it work already. So for us, and my best advice would be identify it now if you haven't already. What would that be for your organization? And how do you solve for that?
Yeah, it's funny for me. I tend to want to put my business owner hat on for that question, because as an owner of a law firm, I mean, the most worst case scenario is that our technology goes out and the lawyers cannot access all of our documents in our law firm technology. We have all of our legal documents in there, so we have to have a backup plan if for some reason we cannot log in to our computer at work. About how we're going to work without accessing, if there's some kind of a technology breakdown, if the power goes out, what is your backup plan? Because everybody is working virtually. So that's a worst case scenario where you cannot log into your information at work. And so you have to plan for those sorts of things so that you don't have a full day where nobody can work, because then, the clients are waiting for answers and you can't access the information. That would be horrible. So those kinds of things, I think that everybody needs to think about those sorts of things for their organization.
Did anyone else have any planning advice for worst case scenario?
I was just going to throw in there, and Katrina kind of already answered it, though, of deciding what is your worst case and having that plan in place, kind of what I was speaking before. At the drop of the hat, so you can get a call and say, oh, 12 people have just been infected and have to be quarantined. If that's your worst case scenario, what are your next steps? And have that so you're not in a panic mode, you know what to do and who to reach out to.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And the next question we have is for Scott. We're interested in possibly renting part of our office space. Are there any resources we can look into for that?
Yes. So I think just to make sure I understand the question, if you're trying to essentially sublease part of your space, I think the first thing I would do is reach out to the landlord, tell them that you're looking into this. And then I would hire a commercial broker if it's commercial space. I would hire a commercial broker because you really need to get a marketing campaign together, and you need to get on all the marketing mediums that would make sure you're covering all your bases, make sure you're getting out to other people in the community who would want that space. It's very hard to do that without a broker. There aren't very many options. You could certainly do it. And I think, honestly, depending on the size of the space and the quality of the space, it may be better to even reach out directly to your own network, maybe first. Let me back up. Speak with the landlord, tell them what you're doing, and then probably reach out to your network. And then if nothing comes to fruition there, then hire a commercial broker. a lot of that's going to be based on the size and quality of the space. If it's a one office at the end of the hall, that's probably going to come through your network. If it's, a half of a floor of an office building, that really you're going to need to probably speak with a broker. The reason you want to speak with a landlord is you want to make sure you, based on what your lease states, that you are able to sublease. You very likely are, but you would just want to make sure of that. And then also, a lot of times the landlord will have pent up demand. Maybe they have a tenant in the building that wants some more space, that they can take that space directly. It's also better for you if the landlord were to take the space back versus subleasing it in most cases.
Thank you. And the next question we have is both for Vanessa and Katrina. If we don't feel comfortable going back to the office when being directed to do so, what rights do we have to advocate for ourselves to continue to work from home?
You want me to go first on that one?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay. So, I mean, a lot of it depends on the position. I mean, you know, work in a restaurant and you are the wait staff, that's obviously not an option, right? So if you work in an organization that may have some flexibility with the positions and you have a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you can ask to work from home as a reasonable accommodation. So the answer to that position, to that question is, it depends on what position you're in and what the organization is doing with regard to its positions. So it's a case by case basis analysis.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And we've had those situations. You know, I have had situations where we were, with the business agreeing to this, opted for hey, you can work from home 2 days a week or 3 days a week, but come in the rest of the days, or some sort of modified schedule. But definitely, you know, again, case by case, but be consistent with whatever those things that you're doing, just to make sure that across the board, because promise you, and you know this, once one person does it, the other person's going to do it, and somebody else is going to do it, and you're going to see that. So consistency, again, is key.
Thank you so much to both of you. The next question we have is for Jennifer. Does anyone know if any special cleaning is needed for freestanding water dispensers that haven't been used regularly? I had heard norovirus could be a concern in the water lines.
Yeah, I'm going to pass that off to Hunter Hicks.
Yeah, I'll take this question. What I would take from that specifically is kind of that new transfer into kind of stepping away from water coolers. In these times, start using more bottled water. I particularly don't know about the norovirus concerns. I would say if you are still using a water cooler, to clean it as you typically would, boiling water, bleach, vinegar, things of that nature, probably more regularly. But I would use that time to shift away from the water cooler, to start using bottled water, to have people bring in their own water, to really get away from having people bunched up where the potential for spread is significantly higher.
Great, thank you so much. And just as a reminder to our participants, you can still add questions in the chat, or you can also add questions in Slido, and feel free to upvote there. I'm gonna look at our chat really quickly and see if there's anything we haven't asked yet. To Hunter and Jennifer, or anyone on the panel, does anyone know where to find Lysol aerosol spray disinfectant?
Yeah, that one's been like a lot of cleaning agents that you can just buy at your grocery store. They're nowhere to be found still. And it's like finding gold sometimes when you do find it. For that, the only thing I can say is, you know, keep checking. Even Amazon, I know, still carries it, things of that nature. If it's for your office that you're gonna be doing on your own, you can find those natures. Because we don't, as a company, we don't use Lysol Aerospray, so it's not like I have a third-party vendor that I could recommend, because we use different agents to, and with the foggers that we use, the electrostatic fogger, which is why we use it and we recommend it, is it's so great. So if it, hypothetically, let's say it's a library, the fog can get even in between books. It goes into any little crevice that's so small, and it's like a magnet, and it attaches onto the virus. So that's why we recommend that. So for Lysol, all I can say is we keep checking the Targets, the grocery stores, and again, Amazon, and see if we can ship it that way.
Thank you, Jennifer. And then we do have another question for Vanessa. If an employee has a COVID symptom and needs to be sent home, what is the organization's responsibility to cover their lost wages before test results come back?
So that question hits right on the head of the FFCRA. And so the CDC guidelines say, yes, send that employee home. So that trumps the ADA. And then once you send the employee home, if they're sent home because of quarantine reasons, then you have to examine whether or not they would be eligible to the paid sick leave, depending on the reason that they were sent home. We can go look through it now, but you have to examine the requirements for the paid sick leave requirement. And if they fall within one of the reasons for the paid sick leave, then you would have to pay them that. If you want me to, I can read you the reasons right now. Let's see. If they're sent home subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine order, and that's why they have to stay home, then they'd be eligible for the paid sick leave. If they've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine, they would be eligible for the paid sick leave. If they're experiencing COVID-19 symptoms and is seeking a medical diagnosis. So if someone is coughing and you send them home, they're eligible to the paid sick leave. That would be the answer. And then number 4 is caring for another person who's subject to an order described above. Number 5 is caring for a child whose school is closed. And number 5 is special because that's the one that allows for the expanded FMLA of paid leave. And number 6 is experience substantial or similar conditions specified by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So yes, if you send someone home because they're coughing and they're going to go get a medical diagnosis, then they are eligible for the paid sick leave, 80 hours of paid sick leave.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I actually have one more question for you. When determining whether or not you meet the criteria for having 25 employees, do you count your seasonal temporary employees or only year-round employees?
I'm gonna have to dig into DOL about that one. I would say you could probably, I'm not gonna guess, I would have to dig into the DOL about that one, but you really wanna look at, let me go pull up that slide on my thing. Hang on a sec, hang on, let me see here. Let's see if I have the answer to that question already. One second, here it is, okay. Yeah, first of all, the DOL doesn't require that you send them any documentation. You just want to create the documentation and save it in your workplace. And so it's a business necessity situation that you can't operate if the employees are on leave. So, logistically, it seems like whoever employees are there that you're dealing with, but I would have to look that quick. Feel free to email me and I can answer that specifically. I'd have to look up whether or not the seasonal employees would count, because it seems to me it would be, if you're trying to fall within that exemption, it would be you're going to have to document why you can't operate if the employees are gone. So it seems like it would be the relevant ones are the ones that are there, but you'd have to email me to give you an exact specific answer on that.
Absolutely. We can definitely make sure to send that to you and hopefully get that back to our members when we send out follow-up resources. Thanks so much, Vanessa. And I'm actually going to kick it to Chelsea for a quick poll.
Yeah, so we wanted to take a second because I know that we're really thinking about what are the different ways that we as a sector can kind of come together and support each other and what we're experiencing. So we wanted to take a moment and hear from you what you're experiencing now. So Elizabeth is going to start a quick poll in Slido. And again, if you haven't been to Slido, I'm going to share the link in the chat again. And MC 2020 is the password for that. And Elizabeth, when you're ready, you can kick off the poll. New technology, we're learning all the time.
I'm experiencing some technical difficulties, but I'm working on the poll right now.
Okay, why don't, Irina, we have one more question in the chat that you had.
We do. And I think, Vanessa, this goes right back to you also. If schools are remote learning and employees are also working remotely, can they still access paid time off to support their child's education?
If they are working remotely, I'm gonna, you know, this is being recorded. I got to watch out. You can email me. I think I remember that if they can work remotely, then they can work remotely, and they don't need it because they're there to care for their child, but they're home, right? So, but let me look that one up to be sure. There's 103 questions and answers on the DOL website, and I have about 6 of them copied on my little PowerPoint presentation, and I don't remember one that says that specifically. I remember many of them talking about remote school, and if there's no option for in-person school and the only option is remote school, then and you have no one else to care for the child, then you can definitely get the expanded FMLA. But if you're teleworking already, and if that's an option for you, and you simply want to help them do their math, that there's a good chance that that's not going to apply. And I don't know if the DOL speaks to that specifically, but I can definitely double check if you want to send me an email specifically, whoever had that question.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. Katrina, it would be great if we could hear from you maybe about how you're navigating work from home and kiddos in school.
Yeah, I've actually had that a very similar situation. Variety of things when it comes to school, and just like Vanessa said, you know, for a situation that we've had an employee working from home, and the children were remote learning, but what the employee found was that she couldn't do both because of the intensity of the remote learning and the age of her children, and she really had to focus there. So, you know, she was able to take the FFCRA because technically the schools were closed. There was no option for the employee to send the kiddos back to school. So that's ultimately what she did, is she took the FMLA due to school closure, which is what Vanessa had talked about earlier in that situation. But I have employees who are working from home. I mean, I'm one of them where I work from home. I have a kiddo in 3rd grade who is remote learning, and it is a juggling act. It is balancing. It is, okay, don't talk to me for an hour, or go do your math, go do your reading, and getting him online and, you know, running back and forth. But I'm not taking paid leave for that. I'm still working. My hours might be a little different. You know, I tend to hop online a lot earlier, maybe work a little bit later, so to accommodate his needs. So, you know, if they're already working from home, then they have that flexibility to do so. I think the main question for the employee is, can they do both? And I think as any parent knows, depending upon the child's age and that sort of thing, what they need help with is going to look different. And that's where that knowing what your options are certainly going to help and come into play here.
Katrina just reminded me of a DOL question. Remember, there's 100, but she just reminded me of one that said, if an employee has been working, and I think this might be question 99 or 100. So here we go. I think that if an employee is teleworking successfully, and then they ask you suddenly to take the expanded FMLA because their circumstances at home have changed, and the school is closed, and the DOL actually gave an example. Like if the spouse was no longer able to care for the kids, and then the spouse, so the second spouse who works for you suddenly needed, even though they've been successfully teleworking from home, now they need to take the leave and their school is closed. It just says yes, they can take the leave because the school is closed. And you don't, and you just have to ask. It does say you can request for documentation and a written statement that they are no longer able to telework, and because they're no longer able to telework, they're eligible for the leave. So thank you, Katrina, for your answer, because it reminded me that there actually is a DOL Q&A on that says that you can ask them and you can get a written statement or a verbal statement that they are no longer able to telework. And so that's like I said, it's on the DOL guidance, and I've got the links on that. And I think that's question 99 or 100. So there you go.
And Irina, I want to just add one thing, and you know, don't be afraid to ask for documentation from your employees when it comes to school closures. Most districts are kind of following each other, is what I've learned, at least locally. But you know, there are charter schools and private schools and all kinds of things. You do as an organization have the right to ask for proof. again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but be consistent with that ask. So if you ask one person for it, make sure you're asking everybody for that proof of school closure. That way, you know, and you know kind of where it falls and what rule to follow. And you know, just like Vanessa's been saying, it's all up in the air. There are tons of questions, tons of answers, and we're all going through that as we need to. And it's changing almost daily, certainly weekly. But you do have that right as a business to ask for that documentation if you're so inclined.
Great, thank you so much for adding that. I'm going to kick it back to Chelsea again.
Okay, we got the technology working. So we opened a quick poll and just wanted to take a moment to hear from y'all about what kind of options are you considering now. You know, there's been a lot of information in this conversation, and I'm sure that you've been thinking about it every day. What are you considering now? Shifting to majority remote work, considering subleasing, considering downsizing your lease, other or unsure? I know there's a lot of uncertainty for sure. Yep, and not surprising, we're seeing a lot of people shifting to majority remote work. I think we're all asking like what can be done in that way, especially as we think about like what costs it creates to bring people back in person for sure. So.
Thanks, Chelsea. And we actually have a follow-up question for Vanessa also. If an employee self-quarantines to be tested due to exposure to a person with COVID-19, no symptoms, can they claim paid sick leave?
I believe that's one of the 6 reasons that I went over. Let me go back and look at them. Hang on a second. I try to memorize everything. I always just go back and look to be sure. Hang on. But then Katrina reminded me, and I was like, oh yeah, I do remember that, don't I? Okay. Let's see here. So if the question was if the employee self-quarantines?
Mm-hmm. Yes, if the employee self-quarantines to be tested due to exposure to a person with COVID-19, no symptoms, can they claim paid sick leave?
If they have no symptoms and they're doing it just to be tested. Let's see. Number one is a quarantine order. 2 is a healthcare provider quarantine order. 3 is experiencing symptoms and seeking a medical diagnosis. So if they have no symptoms, technically they wouldn't qualify for the 3rd reason. Number 4, caring for another person who's subject to an order. 5 is caring for children. So technically they wouldn't. An employer can write their policies any way they want to, though. This is a minimum requirement that needs to be in your policies. But employers can be more generous as long as they're consistent. And just let me back up Katrina on that consistency and the reason she's saying that. Because if you're not consistent, then one employee who's Christian is going to say, hey, you let the Muslim employees do that, but you didn't let me do it because I'm Christian or because I'm Hindu or whatever. And so they're going to claim whatever protected category that they're in is the reason why you didn't let them, but you let the other persons do it. So consistency is the most important thing. And you can write your policies to be more expansive, and you can be more expansive if you want to. And that's not a problem. And so I also want to back up what Katrina said about documentation. The DOL guidelines do have guidelines on the documentation you can request. And you can request the COVID-19 qualifying reason. And you can get a statement from the employee on why they're unable to work or telework due to COVID-19 qualifying reason. And you're entitled to ask for that documentation and keep it. Of course, all documentation you get is confidential under the Americans with Disabilities Act, whether they have a disability or not, and you're supposed to keep it in its own confidential file. So that's an important thing to remember also. Now, if the child's school is closed, you can ask for the name of the child being cared for, the name of the school that's closed, a statement that no other suitable person is available to care for the child. Those are the documentations you can get under DOL guidelines.
Thank you. And I have another question.
No. Sorry, I
go
want
ahead.
to piggyback on that question because I've had that scenario happen where I had an asymptomatic employee. The employee went into the ER actually for something completely unrelated, and during the testing of that, the X-rays showed there was something going on in the individual. So the doctor said, hey, this is a little odd thing that we're seeing. We want you to get tested for COVID. And then that's where he was then placed under quarantine by the medical professional in that example. So not symptomatic at all. It just kind of happened. So then he was placed into quarantine. And that's where, you know, when Vanessa went down those reasons, there would be a reason in there.
Right.
But again, it's hit or miss. So it really depends on the situation, because even if that person, you know, and I've had a number of employees, hey, I was over the weekend and with this person, they contacted me, said they were positive or they're showing symptoms. So now I'm going to go run and get tested. And, you know, we've experienced that a number of times. And for us, because as an organization, we put out our pandemic PTO policy before FFCRA, that situation for the food bank fell under that. But once they are negative, then it's, you got to come back to work now. You don't have to wait and see. So there's a variety of different scenarios, and you know, unfortunately, there's not a one size fits all approach. You kind of have to just let it play out and determine at the same time, while it's playing out, what you're going to do, understanding the rules, the regs, the laws that are in place to help you make those decisions.
On that scenario that Katrina just gave, you can't forget about your normal employment laws. If there's a hospital stay, that's a serious health condition, and that's your regular FMLA. And so there can always be other employment laws that come into play, and it is I definitely agree, it's a case by case analysis with every employee, and you got to go back and look at the reasons, and you got to go back and look at all the regs. I mean, I always go back and look for every question that I get from every client, just to make sure and do what we can for that employee.
Thank you both for that feedback. That was great. I do have another question that's open to anyone on the panel. You can feel free to jump off mute. The question is, what recourse do we have if we don't think our landlord is cleaning the building effectively, and what ventilation improvements are required? Anyone on the panel experience this or have any guidance?
Do you mind, I'm trying to find that question. Do you mind repeating it one more time?
Sure. What recourse do we have if we don't think our landlord is cleaning the building effectively, and what ventilation improvements are required?
Yeah, I don't know recourse. I don't know how, that's more of a legal question that I'm unfamiliar with.
Sure. I mean, I can talk a little bit about that. I mean, you know, you're going to want to send the lawyer a letter, the landlord a letter. You can retain counsel to send them a letter. Put it in writing, you know, that you want to, that you believe the building's not being cleaned. There are some wrongful death actions going on right now against employers in this country due to COVID, and there's all kinds of stuff going on that's just new in employment law. You know, workers' comp claims for catching COVID at work. So there's a lot of things going on. So, you know, if you feel that, you probably want to retain legal counsel and get a lawyer letter over there to them, sharing your concerns, because you don't want to be responsible for someone getting COVID in your workplace.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I did just see a message come up in the chat that's probably for Jennifer or Hunter. Are there any recommendations for cleaning air in an overnight summer camp facility?
If you really wanted to test your air and thought it was dangerous or harmful, what I would recommend is engaging an industrial hygienist, someone who can actually come out there and test the air quality. And then possibly if there was something that he recommended, he could write a protocol that a cleaning company like ourselves or anyone else who's approved to do that could come out and actually execute that protocol.
Thank you. And I have another question for Katrina and Vanessa. Can you require employees to be tested for COVID-19 if they report they are experiencing symptoms and then report their COVID-19 results? What does that look like in practice?
So we've absolutely have done that. So we've when all of this started, one of the things that we put in place was a process, and it was myself and then our COO. So there were two people kind of fact checking and are we on the right path, that sort of thing. But essentially, yes. I mean, if somebody came in, and we put this in our policy up front, if you are come to us and say, I've been exposed, or, you know, I'm showing these types of symptoms. What we do is I immediately tell them, you need to go see your physician. And what I've learned along the way is if they are symptomatic, the doctor's going to send them to get testing. That's just, there has not been a scenario that I have been in where the doctor's like, oh, okay, let's just wait and see. They send them because that's, you know, most of your physicians are erring on the side of caution. And yeah, you can absolutely ask for the results. And again, like Vanessa has said, you know, the results are still medical. It's still under ADA. So you're not going to go posting that around, right? But one of the things that we also made sure that we did is do that contact tracing. So if you do have a situation like that, make sure you're asking them, who have you been in contact with? And for us, it was, were you social distancing? Were you wearing your mask? Tell me a little bit about that contact. And then we notify those individuals as well. So it's a variety of different scenarios can happen from there. But, you know, I typically have said, go to your doctor, keep me in the loop. And every circumstance, the doctor sends them to get tested.
Is it my turn? Here we go. There is actually a Q&A on that question on the EEOC pandemic guidance. There is EEOC pandemic guidance, and I think it has about 25 questions. And one of the questions is, you know, can you take the employee's temperature? Can you, I mean, it has everything that you can do because the CDC guidance trumps. Remember, it takes, nothing in the ADA can interfere with the CDC guidance. And so it specifically says in bold, the CDC guidance on COVID-19, due to the CDC guidance, employers may ask employees who report feeling ill at work or who call in sick questions about their symptoms to determine if they have or may have COVID-19. These symptoms include fever, chills, cough, shortness of breath, or sore throat. So yeah, there's latitude to go ask them. I know I saw that. That's not the exact one, but I know I saw that. You can. The thing again is consistency. And also keep in mind when you're asking for medical testing, a medical test, you can never do it before you hire employees. This is before COVID. I mean, you know, you have to do it. You can do it after you make a job offer. And before they do the job duties, if you do it consistently for that position. And while they're employed during employment, when there's a pandemic, the special CDC guidelines would cover that. And yes, because of the pandemic and the CDC guidance, you can follow that and require testing in certain circumstances.
Thank you. And so we do have one other question that I think it looks like it's a follow-up to a previous question, potentially for you, Hunter. Are there any new requirements for ventilation in the workplace?
No, as far as ventilation is concerned, you could, and we've been asked by some of our clients to go in and clean some of their ducts and spray it down with electrostatic spray and fog it. As far as the effectiveness of that, I can't really speak to it. It's showing that you're doing something from a landlord's perspective or from a company perspective, that you are engaging a third-party professional to do what they can. But again, it goes back to the uncertainty. If we were to go in and fog your air ducts, and then the next day someone were to be in there sick, or multiple people were sick, to say that they wouldn't possibly reinfect the air ducts or something of that nature, it's just impossible to say. So I would recommend cleaning your air ducts, but a full scrub more so than just spraying it. But that's, as far as ventilation, that's really what I would recommend.
Thank you. And we do have another question for Scott. What are some terms that I can consider offering my landlord property owner during lease negotiations?
That's a good one. You know, I think generally landlords would prefer in this environment, some of them will acknowledge that they aren't going to get full rent from all of their tenants. So if you were to ask for a reduction in rent, but then give them term, I think term is sometimes almost more important. There's so many factors, but generally speaking, I think term is very important. I know in my own business, I'm doing that in a lot of cases. If I think, especially if I think the tenant is a strong tenant and will likely survive and thrive, that I'd rather know that I'm going to have them longer. Let's say their lease expires in 2 years and I'm going to give them 6 months of rent abatement. I may add 6 months to the end of their term. The tenant, may be happy with that because they also know that they're strong and will survive and thrive. But this way they have some stability long-term, but they have the short-term relief that they're needed. I think that's probably the best one term.
Great, thank you. And then this is going to be our last question, and it's for Vanessa, and it's related to employees with COVID-19. It's in the chat box. How to have employees with COVID-19 risk factors re-enter the workplace who have been allowed to work remotely at a detriment to the org and really need to be in the office. How do we have employees with COVID-19 risk factors re-enter the workplace who have been allowed to work remotely at a detriment to the org and really need to be in the office?
Okay, this is going to go back to the EEOC guidance that says the CDC guidelines, it will not interfere with the CDC guidelines. So I do remember there's a Q&A if somebody travels somewhere, and you can ask them about where they traveled. You can ask them if they've been exposed. So, you know, when anybody's coming back to work, there's a question that says, during a pandemic, can the employer ask why he or she's been absent from work if the employee suspects a medical reason? There's just exceptions during the pandemic, and you can ask why they haven't been reporting to work. You can ask if they're feeling sick. And does that answer the question? Remind me of the question.
How to have employees with COVID-19 risk factors re-enter the workplace who have been allowed to work remotely at a detriment to the org and really need to be in the office. And I'll invite Stephanie, who posed the question, if we're not answering, or if you want some follow-up to what Vanessa shared, please feel free to add that in the chat, or if you want to come off mute to explain a little more.
I don't know if the employee is showing symptoms, then you can tell them to go get checked out, like Katrina said, but I'm not sure if that answers the question. That question is kind of vague. I think I covered it.
She's asking about COVID risk factors such as age, asthma, pregnancy, and et cetera. So how to have employees with these COVID risk factors like age, asthma, and pregnancy return to the workplace who've been allowed to work remotely.
Oh, got it. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Okay, so in a normal world, you can't ask somebody if they have those kinds of things because that would violate the ADA. In a pandemic world, you actually can. I mean, I remember reading EEOC, one of the EEOC Q&As on EEOC pandemic guidelines, that in a pandemic world you can. And that person who has, they can volunteer that they have a medical condition that makes them more vulnerable to COVID, and they can ask a reasonable accommodation for that to be able to work from home. But actually, I remember an EEOC guideline on that says you can ask for those kinds of things during COVID, because you don't want anyone to be a direct threat to. Remember, there's the direct threat exception that applies, and you don't want anyone to be a direct threat to themselves or to others in the workplace. And so, because that exception automatically applies during the pandemic, that's the reason why you can do things you wouldn't normally be able to do under the ADA.
Great, thank you. And Katrina, do you have any insights? Have you experienced this at all?
Not yet, because so far we're still working from home, or at least the administrative side is. And for those people that are still, the drivers of mobile pantry, I haven't had that situation. But, what you're talking about here is, somebody could essentially say, I'm a high risk person. So that's where they're over 60, 65. I can't remember what the age is. I have asthma. I have my immune system is compromised. Essentially, then that falls under, you can ask questions like what Vanessa said, but then you're having an ADA conversation. So, they could technically go to their doctor and get a doctor's medical, a letter, certification, something that says you need to accommodate them. And then that goes, just like any other ADA situation, then you have to go into, is it an undue hardship on the business? And how is that? Is there an alternate position that they can't, then it kind of snowballs from there and becomes more of that ADA issue. So they could certainly go get a certification from their doctor that they are high risk and you need to accommodate them to work from home. That's a possibility. I haven't seen that yet, but that's essentially what we would do and have that conversation if and when we get there.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you to all our panelists. That's actually all the time we have today for questions, and I'm going to send it back to Chelsea.
Right, y'all. Thank you, everyone, for sharing such insight. Thank you, everybody on this call, for sharing your questions and your comments. We're really grateful for everyone joining us today. It's been so enlightening to see how much we're all navigating kind of different sides of the same experience. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to kind of talk through what's working and what's not working. We're going to be collecting all of the questions and evaluating if there are other resources we can share out to address issues that weren't addressed today. And we'll also make sure that we'll be getting the information that Vanessa specified so that we can share that out in the follow-up email as well. Truly, thank you to all of your panelists. We really are grateful for your expertise. Thank you for sharing your insight and your recommendations. We're sharing in the chat now an evaluation link that we'll also send via email for our next follow-up. We really want to hear from you. How helpful was this event session? What else we can do to support you? If there are other things that we can do to help meet you in time. We know that things are changing every day. And so we want to make sure that this time that we share together is as relevant for you as possible. And finally, final thanks to our panelists, Katrina, Vanessa, Jennifer, Hunter, Scott. Thank you for sharing your insight, and to our community partners who make this possible. Thank you for your support. We hope you all will be in touch with a follow-up email. I hope you find some rest today or this coming weekend, and take care of yourselves. We're here if you need us. We look forward to seeing you.